Daniel was still very troubled. Verse 28 tells us that Daniel was still very troubled after this vision. Here we see Babylon in chapter 2 and in chapter 7 depicted by these two symbols. Babylon's rule was from 605 to 539 BC. After Babylon, the Medes and the Persians. Remember, the two arms, one of which is stronger, and the bear which is raised up on one side. The Medes were the ones who conquered Babylon at the beginning, but the Persians were the ones who became the greatest. The Persian Empire. And so at the beginning they were together, and at the end, the one that came up second was the strongest, the Persians. And this is represented by the chest of silver and the bear. Greece, from 331 to 168 BC, with Alexander as the head, and his 4 generals, the kingdom being divided to them. After that, Rome. The Iron Monarchy of Rome, as some of the world's historians have said, the Iron Monarchy of Rome. And this was from 168 BC to 476 AD. And then the 10 toes. Do they still have iron in them? Yes, they do. Where did the 10 horns sprout up? On the 4th beast, right? So they're part of, still some of that power is still in there. And these 10 kings, the Roman Empire fell in 476 BC. And these 10 Germanic tribes took possession of that, and they're still in possession of that today, modern day Europe. And the Bible tells us that in the days of these kings, God is going to set up his eternal kingdom. We're on the brink of eternity, according to Daniel's prophecy, as we can see clearly from Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. And after these 10 horns, there is a little horn in there that plucked up 3 of these. By the way, I don't know if you know this, and I'm not going to mince any words. I'm not going to mince any words, and I want to tell you this too. The feet that are with clay and iron represent Roman Catholic papacy. And I don't say that demeaning anyone who's Catholic. I don't say that to put any of them down. I say that because I think we should, this is what God is saying. This is what his prophecy is saying. We're going to take a look a little bit more at that. But what is the attitude that we should have? Even towards our enemies. Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for them. How did Daniel? I mean, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, took him from his home when he was 17 years old, castrated him, made him a eunuch, forced him to serve, changed his name to the name of his gods, tried to make him eat all these unclean things. What was Daniel's attitude toward the king of the power that destroyed his homeland and his whole life? So that Daniel never had any children. He never had any posterity. What was Daniel's attitude toward the head of the power that did that? Daniel said, King, break off your sins that the Lord may extend mercy to you. Daniel was an ambassador for God to, in the book of Revelation, chapter 18, there is a call that God sends to his people. Come out of her, my people. Come out of Babylon, lest you partake of her sins. The same exact things that Daniel spoke to Nebuchadnezzar. Break off your sins that God may extend and prosper you. Don't do evil anymore. That's the same message that God has for this power in the end of time. He calls the people that he loves to come out from it and to be separate from it. And we are not to bear anything other than the attitude of Daniel toward any power or any people. We have no enemies. There is not a single person on this earth who God or his son Jesus Christ or we should consider our enemies. There may be people that consider us their enemies, but we should not consider them our enemies. So I don't say this with any malice. I don't say this with, this is just what the Bible prophecy plainly says. And so this little horn power ruled from 538 AD at the decree that Emperor Justinian made from Constantinople, because the Germanic tribes had completely overrun the Roman Empire. He had to move his capital to the east. And in 538, he said, the Bishop of Rome is to have complete political authority in Rome. And from that 538 decree, what happened from there? That Roman church was the power over all of Europe, to the point where all of Europe was called Christendom, and yet it reigned without the spirit and authority of Christ. It persecuted God's people. If people would not submit to it, it would torture them, it would do horrible things to them. This is what we've learned so far. We know, number one, that the judgment of God's people begins after 31 AD. The lion, it's Babylon. We've already gone over this. The bear meat of Persia, the dreadful beast was pagan Rome, but from that, on the head of that beast were 10 horns, which were these Germanic tribes. And then after those Germanic tribes came in, the Roman Empire fell 476. These Germanic tribes took possession of the western half, and out from the place where the 10 horns were, a little power arose that came to full power in 538, and that was papal Rome. And after that, the judgment, sometime after papal Rome has been in power, the judgment, and that beast will be destroyed, and the Son of Man comes to receive his kingdom. Daniel chapter 2, parallel to Daniel chapter 7. We've seen that. Okay, let me talk to you about this little horn power for a little bit. In Daniel 7:25, we will learn that this little horn has the power to persecute God's people for time, times, and half a time. In Daniel 4, until 7 times pass over you, you're going to eat grass, Nebuchadnezzar. What did times represent in that chapter? 1 year. So here we have, for a time, 1 year, times, plural, 2 years, and a half a time. So we have 3.5 years. Now this is prophetic time. And with prophetic time, you have to take into account a day for year principle. In the 360 days, because of the lunar year that the Jews calculated with, 360 days times 3.5, what does that give us? 3.5 times 360 is 1,260 years. This power, this papal power, had supremacy over all of Western Europe for a period of 1,260 years. And after the decree of Justinian in 538, for another 1,260 years forward, he had power. And what we learn from this is that the judgment occurs sometime after this reign of power. So the judgment that goes on in heaven, that is a type and a symbol of the Day of Atonement, cannot occur anytime before 1798. It has to be at some point afterward. By the way, these times and half a time, Revelation 12 uses the exact same words. And that this woman that was persecuted by the beast is nourished in the wilderness for a time, times, and half a time. The same amount of time. And by the way, Revelation 13 again tells us that this power was allowed to destroy for a period of 42 months. 42 months is the exact same time period. That's how we know. And also, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 42 months. All three of those time periods are mentioned in the Bible, and all three of those time periods are the exact same amount of time. If you count forward from 538 to 1,260 years, you come to 1798, exactly on time. And in 1798, Napoleon and France, and not just France, but many of the nations of Western Europe were just through with the rule of the Pope. And in 1798, Napoleon sent his general Berthier, and he sacked the city of Rome, and he took the papacy and deposed him from his throne and sent him into exile where he died. And the papacy lost its power exactly 1,260 years after the beginning of that power.